Hey guys, this is Canadian. Welcome to part 2 of my guide for Plasmatech. In the first video I went over utilities and some of the baked-in passives, the baked goodies into being a Plasmatech. And in this video I'll go over more of the abilities and the rotation, how that works, and a little bit of a PvP context and how you should be more effectively using those abilities. And then I'll go over cooldowns, that kind of stuff. So basically, a couple things about Vanguards is they are a melee class, but they fight like effectively at 10 meters. They don't have to be in the traditional 4-meter range that the other melee classes have to be in. So the exception to the rule is Shock Strike, where that has to be applied at 4 meters, but that's on a 9-second cooldown, so basically it's only once every 9 seconds that you have to walk in and Shock Strike, and then you can just immediately walk back out. And in a lot of cases you can do the Shock Strike at the very edge of the 4 meters and then just walk out immediately, and you'll find in PvP you can really leverage that kind of 10-meter range against melee and range classes, because melee classes you're finding you could find you can kite them, so they can't hit you, so that's a good way of surviving as a Vanguard because you are a little squishy. The 6.0 did improve survivability, but you still are just a little on the squishy side because other classes still have better defensive cooldowns than you. So when you're engaging, the way the rotation works, and for kiting, the 10 meters against ranged, you can, the range classes find it really difficult to shake a melee class from 4 meters, but one that can fight effectively at 10 meters is really difficult. So you'll find that people just can't shake you, so you have pretty relentless damage, so a lot of people have difficulty dealing with it. So you'll notice that if you're really good at avoiding the ways they can kite you, and yeah, you're going to find you'll land a lot of kills just on range classes. So when you're engaging in PvP, the optimal rotation would have you do Plasmatech first and then Incendiary round, but and you can, and that would be the best way of applying your dots first, because that's what you need to do first, dots up. Plasmatech is a great dot, but it applies a debuff that increases tech damage by 5%. And then you want to use the Incendiary round afterwards, because then it benefits from that 5%. But in reality, when you're in PvP here, if you can, you don't want to use your Storm off the bat. You want to save that in your back pocket, because you can apply your Incendiary round from range, and as you get closer, you can Plasmatech, and then when you get even closer, you can use your Shock Strike. So it just allows you to keep that. So if they inevitably a range class, for example, they're gonna Sage is gonna use their little force sprint to get away from you, or Shadow would do the same thing. Everyone's got a little trick that they can get away from melee, so you got to be prepared to bridge a gap. So if you have your Storm is available, it's on a relatively short cooldown compared to your Harpoon or your Hold the Line. So that's a good time to use it then. And so as you get in there, or even before you apply your dots, you should be just always keeping 2 stacks of Pulse Generator up. That boosts your Ion Wave. So if you're not needing to, if you're not fighting, just always keep that 2 stacks rolling. So when you do get engaged, you can put up your dots, close the gap, and then right away your Ion Wave hits hard. It boosts your Plasma Flare, so it hits hard, and then that'll boost your Ion Pulse to be free. So it doesn't use any ammo, so you can basically, when that pops like that, you can just spam it. And your Shock Strike would be kind of the next thing you'd want to use, and that makes your high impact bolt an automatic critical hit, so that would be your next one. And it's basically, in a nutshell, you're keeping your dots up, and you just want to make sure that you're always making sure your Ion Wave is boosted, so when it's up, it's boosted, ready to go, so you can use it right away, so that boosts your Plasma Flare. So it's basically making sure Ion Wave gets boosted, and then your Plasma Flare gets boosted, and then your next priority is the Shock Strike and High Impact Bolt. So now just to talk about more about each individual in here. So I talked about the range of Plasmatech and Incendiary round. So if you're close to start with, and you need to start your rotation, Plasmatech is the better button to push first. But if you're at range when you're trying to engage, then yeah, usually the Incendiary round, and then as you're walking to him, then you can Plasmatech. So the ion pulse here, it's nice that again you can use it at range here. So it's 10-meter range typically. Now you can. It's usually the spammable attack you use to build charges for Ion Wave, but because you can use it at 10 meters, and it's actually all your attacks you can do this. When you're, for example, fighting someone like this target dummy here, you can use line of sight to hide behind every ability activation. So basically, for the other person, what it means is you pop out of in line of sight, so now they can try to start hitting you, but you've already fired your ability and you're behind. So you find classes when you pop out that briefly, they start casting, and then because you've broken line of sight so quickly, like their ability stops casting. So you pop out, hit your next attack, hide again, and you can keep doing this over and over. And the bad PvPers won't recognize what you're doing; they'll just stand there in the open and die. Sometimes without having fired a shot. Now, the good ones should recognize what you're doing pretty quickly here when they see you popping in and out like that very quickly, that you're evading damage completely. So they'll have to move to a better position so they can cut off your little trickery there, so they can get full line of sight with you. The good PvPers, the ranged ones anyway, when they see what's going on, they're going to try and kite you to somewhere more open, so you have to come to engage them. They don't want to kite you around boxes or be in close quarters with you. They fight more effectively at range. So that's for melee, they're just basically going to chase you around anywhere you go. So you can still leverage the fact you can kite melee with everything being 10 meters, but your ion pulse is if you picked up the entangling roots utility, your ion pulse is going to stare them for 30%. So you might apply that a little more often than you generally would in case you need to kite, for example, just because it applies a snare. And if they get too close, you can shock strike so they can start roost them, and then you can get away and then start applying your snare again. So shoulder cannon is pretty nice, and if you can, try to save it for when battle focus is up, because shoulder cannon has a 1.5 minute cooldown, and battle focus is only 2-minute cooldown. So if you can hold off using it, it's nice just to kind of line them up together. That way you get hopefully everything crits. So shock strike, I mentioned how important it is in the rotation, but for PvP it's really important for the root. So you might find for the DPS rotation, you might do things just a little out of order from what's optimal, just because the root is so important. And as an example, why is you can stop a scoundrel from rolling, and the entire survivability is rolled up into the roll. So if you stop him from rolling, you could land some damage, some hard-hitting attacks, and it just makes it harder for them to avoid it. But one important element to consider is Ion Wave sucks for spreading your dots. It's just so hard to land correctly. So when you're got your Incendiary round up, this is the most important target you need to hit with your Ion Wave, because it generates the dot spreading to everything else. So doesn't matter if Ion Wave hits the other people. It's as long as it hits the guy with the dot first, then everything clicks. Without hitting that guy with the dot, then the Ion Wave's useless. So you can cover it with Shock Strike. It roots him in place first, and then you can hit Ion Wave. So that way it gives you chance to it roots him down for 2 seconds. So it gives you 2 seconds that if you can position yourself so you can hit more people with Ion Wave, it gives you that extra little time. And you can also use your stuns as well. So if you're in a group of people, just walk into the middle of it. It always stun everybody, and then you can position yourself to spread your dot, so you can hit as many people as possible. It's a really nice way of doing it. I think if you don't cover your Ion Wave with Shock Strike or some stuns, it's more optimal not to have to do that. But you find you might miss, or you may not hit everybody you're intending to. So it's a little bit different way of using it in PvE versus PvP. So Plasmatech kind of already talked about. Your hammer shot, just basically your auto shot. You will occasionally find yourself needing to use this. That's just to either save yourself some ammo if you're probably just spamming nuke a little too often, or if you have a shadow, if they use their I can't remember this, their cloak, whatever it's called, the thing that makes them immune to the tech and whatnot. So if they do pop that on you, then the only thing you could actually use to do any damage is Hammer Shot, because they're immune to tech, so you can't hit them with anything. You can't even use High Impact Bolt, which would normally work, but it needs a tech debuff on the target first to be able to fire, so you even can't use that. So it's literally auto shot is all you got. So Flak Shell is a really good ability to pop. It does more damage than Explosive Surge, and it applies the damage a lot more easily because the impact is at the person you hit. So as long as you target something in the middle, it just blows up around everyone else. So this is you use Artillery Blitz if you're doing AoE, and of course your Iron Wave, and Artillery Blitz before you use Flak Shell. But once those are off are on cooldown, then Flak Shell's better to use over Explosive Surge. So yeah, nice to use, and if you've picked up the utility that adds a snare on it as well, that's really nice. You'll probably be using that a lot. So the Iron Wave we kind of talked about, but the really important thing is to make sure that you're only using it when you've got 2 stacks of your Pulse Generator up. So it does more damage, but also the 90% snare is super effective. It's just equivalent of rooting some people in PvP, and it's AoE, so it applies as an AoE switch. It's really nice. You'll find people tend to react very strongly when they have a 90% snare on them, and it only lasts 3 seconds, but those 3 seconds feels like forever when you can't move. So you'll find people will be blowing cooldowns that they may not need to. Like if they just waited it out, they probably would have been fine, but people just react strongly sometimes. So you can really take advantage of that if you see them popping cooldowns. Maybe they didn't need to. Recharge cells, just lets you go hog wild, go completely ham with mashing nuke for a while, and then when you get really low, then you can pop this to kind of recover. It's really nice, kind of like a burst option, basically. Your Explosive Surge is not that good damage-wise. If you picked up the utility Entangling Tools, you can consider this a good way of applying a 30% AoE snare, which is really nice for some war zones. It's a good way of providing peels for your teammates if everybody on the other team is walking a little slower, and that's particularly effective in like Void Star, for example. Like you can really stop the enemy team from progressing quickly. Between your AoE stun and your AoE snares, you can really slow people down. So generally, this is like your last option you want to use for AoE, and I wouldn't think about using this unless it's gonna at least hit 3 people. Because if it's only going to hit 2, then it's really not worth it. You have better buttons to hit than that. So Reserve Power Cell is just kind of nice to use liberally. It's not a terribly important cooldown. It's just something you can use just to prevent yourself from dipping down into like a less effective regen. Okay, Hold the Line. That's a super important cooldown for Vanguards. It's great because it provides you protection from snares and roots, and some physics attacks as well, like being people throwing you or pulling you around. So it basically makes you impossible to be guided, so you can always stay on someone's ass and keep damage rolling, so they can't do anything but stun you, or basically CC you. And when you do pop it, you'll have to anticipate that's likely coming, because you'll be able to apply a lot of pressure, and people will respond correctly by CCing you, so just be ready to pop your CC breaker. So the associated utilities with this one, you've got Iron Will, which is great. That's a pretty good one to pick. There's a strong argument for taking that one, just to reduce the cooldown. And also there's Advance the Line. It increases the duration, so you get that protection for longer, and mobility is part of it. And you got Charge the Line here as well, so you get to run super quick with 40% run speed. So it's a really good cooldown to use. Okay, so Storm, I talked a little about trying to keep this one in your back pocket if you can, but if you need to use it to traverse elevations or terrain, for example, that would be a good reason to blow it early. But yeah, if you can keep it in your back pocket, then yeah, keep it. So your High Impact Bolt, yeah, you never push this button unless you use Shock Strike first, because it should always crit, no matter what. So your Neural Jolt, that's your taunt. It's really, really good to use in PvP, and it's on a short cooldown. It's only 15 seconds, and it's very effective in PvP, and not enough people use it. So just on its own, it's just great to just keep thrown out there, and that really does help reduces a lot of damage, and particularly when you know like someone's about to die, like that's peels that they absolutely need, and that's a great relief for healers if you can throw those out. And a lot of classes right now have some pretty insane burst that they're doing. So if you can time your taunts for those burst windows, that really mitigates a lot. Okay, so your interrupt here, you know, generally like it's basically for important things is what you want to shut down, and just be mindful that really competent players are going to try to bait your interrupt. So you may want to make sure that you're not using your interrupt too quickly when you see an ability you want to interrupt, because it's very common. Really competent players will fake cast you, so they'll start casting an ability, and they'll let it go for maybe a little bit past halfway or maybe a little sooner, and then we'll stop casting and see if they've baited you into using your interrupt. And if they see you use it, then they can just freely cast. So just be conscious. You may want to make sure that you are using it correctly, and that's generally when you're at the tail end of their cast, because then that's the most likely where they've kind of committed to the cast at that point, because if they don't, then they've just wasted a bunch of time. So the next one, Plasma Flare. The only time you use this one, again, is when it's boosted. You generally don't want to use this when it isn't boosted. And you can use it at 10 meters, so again, this class is super effective at 10 meters, because everything except for Shock Strike functions at 10 meters. So Guard. Guard is kind of a nice tool to have, but Vanguards are just a little bit on the squishy side, so you don't want to use it unless you are in situations where you can maybe just help someone get through a little bit of burst and take some damage. Or if you want to help out a healer on your team, eat some of the damage for them, but you're going to need to be prepared to turn this thing off, because there's going to be times where you're just eating too much damage just from Guard, so and you may not have an effective way of dealing with it. You just might actually just like TKO yourself. So in those situations, you may need to let the person who's getting tunneled die, just because otherwise it kills you both. So Harpoon, next one here. This is a really great cooldown to use when you start using it at like the higher levels of PvP. You know, at a basic level, it's just a way of getting people to, you know, pull them to you so you can damage them. But at the higher levels, in arenas, for example, you can, if you can get into like a good position, and you find the other team's got like one person that's vulnerable, like maybe like a straggler who didn't jump down as soon as the doors open right away, and is just running to catch up to the rest of his group. It's like, if you can nail that guy, for example, pull them to your team behind a wall, and like, so he has no line of sight with his healer, his DPS can't line of sight you guys with like CC or any damage. Like, you can blow that person you pulled up, and you know, it's just, and even if they have cooldowns to survive it, you know, you've put that other team in such a bad position, because, you know, that person's going to be hanging on to dear life, and they have to recover from that, so you have the complete momentum in your favor. So, you know, if you can get pretty good about those timings where you can get a nice harpoon out, like, it's game ending at that point. It's checkmate. And there's creative uses for it in Warzone, so like in PvP, like hot ball, pulling people in the fire is always a classic. You know, pull them into fire, then stun them, and you know, you get your ball. And there's in Void Star, for example, there's also that area where you have those two bridges, where it's like really dangerous to cross, because you know everybody knows about it, and someone's gonna try and knock your ass off, or you're gonna try to knock someone else off. So something you can do is, and like, not go on the bridge itself or like anywhere near the bridge, but you have that more central ledge connected to the rest, you know, like where the doors are, so you can stand on those ledges and just basically almost have like 1 foot off. You know, you're about to fall off yourself, and when you pull someone to you, because there's no ledge for them to stand on when they reach you, they just fall to their death. So it's kind of a creative way of just killing someone. So like healers, for example, like if you see a healer's trying to cross a bridge and you can position yourself to pull them and kill them that way, that's like, it doesn't matter how much healing they can do. It's like that's like, you're out, done. So okay, Sonic Round. It's really good for peeling. Again, taunts are super good in PvP, because a lot of classes are dealing an insane amount of damage right now, so this has become more important than ever. for people to start using, and not enough people use their taunts. So if you see a chance where you can hit people with Sonic Ground, just like use it. It's the short 35-second cooldown. And if you've got the utility for Sonic Rebounder, like that gives a reflect on it as well. So it means that the person, your teammates get a buff so that it doesn't, at least one hit, doesn't hurt them, and it reflects it back to the attacker. So for those classes that are doing some pretty insane damage right now, like if you can time this, like at the like PvP at the higher levels, if you understand the mechanics of the other classes, you can time this in their burst windows, and it's really effective. Like if a deception assassin mauls himself to the face once, it hurts. So next one here, Artillery Blitz. This is a really good AoE cooldown. Like this is the best one you got, pretty much. So like you're going to be using your Iron Wave first, because it spreads your dot and it hits art itself. But Artillery Blitz comes in second, for sure. So the kinetic damage and elemental damage is really nice, but something that's really good for PvP is you can cast it and then break line of sight, and it'll continue casting. Like you don't need to have line of sight like you do with every other AoE in the game. So like if you want to damage the Warzone dummy here, so you can start casting it and then hide behind a wall, and your cast will continue going. So your opponents can't stop, can't interrupt you because they don't have line of sight. So the cast keeps going, and they can't damage you either. So it's kind of a nice thing to do. That if there's something close by that you can use to use line of sight to hide while it's casting, just do it because it's so effective. And last one to talk about, not quite last, but something else to talk about, Stealth Scan. You want to try and use this as quickly as possible. Generally, when scoundrels and assassins are going to vanish, they're going to likely do it when they get low in health, or if they're feeling like really threatened, like there's a lot of pressure, like a couple DPS are maybe going after them, then there's a high probability that the vanish is coming. So just be ready for stealth scanning on the spot they vanish. So if you could do it like instantaneously and catch them red-handed, like generally they're not getting out of that area that quickly. And if you're not quick on the draw like immediately, the next best thing is to try and anticipate where they're going to escape from. So there might be like a place where they can break line of sight. That's usually a good spot to maybe put it ahead, see if they run through it. Or if there's a health power-up somewhere in like a war zone, that's a likely spot they're going to head to from stealth because they can heal unseen. So if you might be able to catch them that way. But it's mainly with this ability, the effectiveness is based on how fast you react. So if your reaction speed sucks, you're not going to see this catch a lot of people. Okay, so some of your defensive cooldowns here, your CC breaker, generally you want to not use it on the first time you get CC'd. So if somebody throws a stun at you, you generally want to save it for the next CC, because if you break that first stun, a competent PvPer is going to CC you again immediately, because for example, if you're running up against a really good commando, if they stun you and you break it right away, they're just going to use their instant cast soft CC on you, or whatever it's called, and then you're just going to eat 8 seconds of CC, and there's nothing you can do about it because you blew your CC breaker way too early. So just keep that in mind. There's good times and bad times to use it. If you can not blow it and your team's going to be fine, and you wouldn't land a kill if you broke it and just did like a little bit more damage. Like if it's just like, if I pop this and do one more ability I can kill the guy, then okay, you might get away with it. But generally, if you can keep this in your back pocket for a little bit, it's generally good not to blow it too early, but you might have to, and that's, you're going to find with more experience you'll judge correctly when is a good time to blow it. But generally, as a basic rule, it's like if you can delay it, like if you don't have to, then save it. Your reactive shield, it's pretty basic. If you anticipate taking a lot of damage, pop it. So like if someone's tunneling you, for example, and you know they're going to commit, then yeah, it's a good thing to pop. So your adrenaline rush, this is actually this is really good for Plasmatech because they have a baked goodie into Plasmatech. So every time they get hit, like basically when it's off cooldown, or sorry, when it's on cooldown rather, getting hit reduces the cooldown by 6 seconds. So your adrenaline rush is going to be up a lot more often. So, and when Adrenaline Rush does proc this, passive is really nice because that 30% damage reduction is really strong. So you'll notice that when this thing procs, it noticeably increases your life. It's a really good thing. But you want to make sure that when you do use this, keep in mind that if you are getting low, take a look at your resolve, and if you're within range of, if you're under danger of getting CC'd twice by like 2 hard stuns, like then at that point you're usually put into checkmate because you usually can't survive that. But if you think that's a risk and that could happen, and and your damage is getting low, then you want to think about maybe popping this, because you want to pop this before you get stunned. Otherwise, you won't be able to get out of it, and you're screwed. However, if you do have the efficient tools utility, this will give you Adrenaline Rush acting as a second CC breaker. Generally, soft CC you don't worry about too much because the moment someone damages you, it breaks. So if someone's trying to kill you and they throw that at you, it's kind of like self-defeating because then unless they're healing up, they have to hit you right away. So you don't have to worry about breaking that all that often. Usually, if you just wait long enough, they'll just break it for you. But it's the stuns you worry about because then people will still be able to unload on you. So having a second CC breaker is sometimes really nice. Especially out in class that can be sometimes a little bit squishy. Okay, so next one, battle focus. Now this is something that makes you absolutely lethal in PvP. Like when you pop this, like people will die. So and competent PvPers are going to be aware that if they see you pop this thing really early, they know that the pain train is coming. So the competent PvPers are going to CC you and wait that one out. They're not going to go anywhere near you. So the bad ones, they're not going to notice, and you're just going to blow them up. But the competent ones, yeah, they're not going to let you do it. So you want to make sure that against a competent PvPer, you might want to look at just doing like your initial damage without popping it first, and when some CC comes your way, it'll put your resolve bar up a little bit, so that way you can pop it safely. And if someone sees that and CCs you, that'll put you to full resolve, and it'll make you immune to more CC. So then you can just like pop your CC breaker, and then for sure you're going to be able to benefit the full freedom of the full duration of it because. It does so much damage, so if they don't respond correctly, they just get blown up. So just be conscious of the fact that other competent PvPers do know how to deal with it, and that's to CC you when it's up. So just be prepared for that fact. Now your stuns, there's kind of like different ways you can do it, but the most effective use for it is basically, in a nutshell, is to do damage to someone, and then you want to send the stuns out afterward to kind of like to secure the kill, basically. You'll find the more amateur Vanguards, they'll kind of just run up, and the first thing they hit you with is like a stun. Like they haven't applied dots or anything, or and they just basically want to CC you straight off the bat, and then now they put you at full resolve, and now you can just unload on them like everything, and they can't stop you. So. You generally want to kind of reserve these for when you can finish off a kill. So you can open people up with kind of like put your dots up and then weave in stuns to kind of like keep the burst going. So you shut them down early and then you get your damage rolling, so that way you have the momentum. So you can use your stuns differently. So it basically comes down to experience and the position you see. And the context of what you're fighting in really determines how you're going to use these stuns, but experience will teach you better which ones to use and how to use them. So that's basically everything in a as kind of a summarize. Basically, the class is a lot more complicated than that, and when you start talking about specific uses against other classes, and that would just make for way too long of a video. So I hope this serves as kind of like a baseline for most people, and you'll find with more experience you'll learn how to appropriately deal with each class. So hopefully this information is useful. I know these are tending to be a little long-winded, but I think people might appreciate the context more of how these abilities are used in PvP, because in PvE guides that's not really discussed. So so hopefully this is beneficial. I plan to come out in part 3 with maybe some gearing, so talk about tacticals and the gear sets and how they might interact with your abilities, and maybe a couple some numbers as well. I'm reading are starting to come out now, so people are figuring out how the expansion is looking. So yeah, hopefully that comes out the next video. I'm not sure when that's coming out, but I'm hoping to put something up soon. Anyways, thanks guys.